Okay, fantastic. So, b'siyata d'shmaya, with Hashem's help, I hope everybody had the most wonderful Shavuos, and we jump back on this Monday into our series exploring Rebbe Nachman's Sichos Haran, our class trip with Rebbe Nachman, discovering many of the anecdotal teachings and biographical comments about this incredible Jew and his wisdom and his everything that he comes to teach us. And we begin, I'm just going to share my screen, with jumping back into Sichos Haran 142, Kuf Mem Beis. And here, just give me one more second. Okay. So here we begin. Says the Heilige Rebbe Sichos Haran Kuf Mem Beis. It's actually Rebbe Nachman talking, and Rebbe Nachman says, "Shayach l'masha Amar Rabbeinu Zal ala pasuk oidia emunascha b'fi." The following, because we're still in that section where we're talking about different teachings that are like adding in information that weren't given over in the actual teachings in Likutei Moharan, but they're related to them. So we begin with the teaching that is related to Likutei Moharan Tinyana Torah Mem Dalid, which is on the pasuk Oidia emunascha b'fi. David HaMelech says, "I will make known my faith b'fi, with my words, with my mouth." And Rebbe Nachman says over there, "She'ikar ha'emuna toile b'peh shel ha'adam," that the essence of a person's faith relates to a person's words, how a person speaks. And Rebbe Nachman gives the advice over there that if a person sinks into struggles with emunah and a person falls into a lack of emunah, he says that person should go and speak words of emunah and speak to Hashem and say, "Hashem, I'm having a hard time believing in you today. Ribbon Shalom, please help me have emunah." And somehow through the dibur in and of itself, so that emunah is strengthened. And that's what the Rebbe says over there. So here Rebbe Nachman says, I found, says Rebbe Nachman, a similar teaching that was recorded by the Ksav Yad Chaverim. The Chaverim were those students of Rebbe Nachman that had been by the Rebbe before Rebbe Nachman discovered Rebbe Nachman, before he came close. Those were called the Chaverim. And they had written down a very similar thing, explaining it in a little bit of greater depth. V'zula Shainai, and this is what they wrote. When a person falls into challenges of emunah, a person's having a hard time connecting to Hashem, a hard time connecting to the Torah. So then v'yesh gvurais, so then yoimer b'pemale, you should say with his mouth, ani ma'amin be'emunah shalema shuhu yachid rishon va'achron. And to say that out even when we're having trouble actually believing it, but to speak out those words, which are reflective of the deeper reality that deep inside, every person knows the truth. But we say with our mouths, I believe ani ma'amin be'emunah shalema shuhu yachid, that he is all there is. Essentially, that's what yachid means, right? It means that there is nothing else but the one, and that every single thing that we could theoretically fit into a different category ultimately fits in that broadest, ultimate canvas, the fundamental space, the place, the makom of all of reality. And we say this with our mouths. I believe he is the Yachid, Rishon, V'achron. I believe he is first. I believe he is last. Ki adua, because it's known, says Rebbe Nachman, and this is additional to what he says over there in Likutei Moharan. That's why Rebbe Nachman is bringing it, because he adds some information here. He says it's known, Yetzer Hara nimshach mi gvuras hanafulin. The Yetzer Hara emerges from the place of fallen gvura, fallen severity. This is the makom, this is the place of the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is rooted in an energy of lack, in an energy of withholding, in a void, which is gvura vis-a-vis chesed, right? So chesed is giving, chesed is benevolent, right? Chesed is a flow, creativity, godliness, divinity. It's the ray of godliness that re-enters the kav, re-enters rather the halal, re-enters the void. And therefore anything that's life-affirming, anything that's productive, that evolves, anything that develops, that grows, that produces, this is godly. And that's the midah of chesed. Gvura comes to hide that, right? Gvura is the foil. Gvura is the contrast to chesed. And that's the root for the Yetzer Hara. the concealment of godliness, the concealment of Hashem's presence. And so all Yetzer Hara is rooted in Gevura Hanefula, the fallen aspect of Gevura. Why is it fallen? Because ultimately, Gevura is a very positive thing. Gevura is one of the midos of Hashem. We need there to be boundaries. Anything that's three-dimensional, or even anything that's two-dimensional, anything that has dimensions has boundaries. It exists. And that's how we can demarcate this thing from that thing. The whole world needs Gevura. Otherwise, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu hadn't said, Misha Amar La'olam die, if Hashem hadn't put a gevul, put a boundary, so the world would have just kept on expanding, and we wouldn't be able to demarcate fire from water, and water from air, and air from earth. Gevura is very crucial for the development of our reality. However, if all a person has is Gevura, and if a person is accessing an energy of Gevura that is total, so that it isn't just coming to mitigate and to mediate chesed, but it's like absolutely coming to, to destroy the concept of Hashem's benevolence, so then what you're left with is Gevura de Sitra Achra. What you're left with is Gevura Nefula. It's the fallen expression of this boundaried energy, which ultimately comes to hide God away. And that's where the Yetzer Hara comes from. The Yetzer Hara comes from that place of Gevurais Hanefulin, of fallen Gevura. So the Rebbe says, V'yesh Gevuras de Kedusha shebem namtik ma Gevuras de Klipa. So how do you thereby counteract fallen Gevura, which we understand now to be the source of the Yetzer Hara? How do we counteract that? Says the Rebbe, well, we need holy Gevura, right? We need Gevura de Kedusha. We need Gevura which is porous, right? Which means the energy of a limitation used in its proper setting, where it's part and parcel of the productivity, as opposed to chas v'shalom just closing up the flood altogether. That's going to counteract the Yetzer Hara. So what is that? What is the Gevura de Kedusha shebehem amtikim ha-Gevuras de Klipa? That with that we're able to sweeten the Gevura of the Klipa, which is the fallen Gevura of pure limitation and blocking godliness. So what is that? Says the Rebbe, v'hadibor hu bechinas Gevuras de Kedusha. Words, speech is Gevura, but it's elevated Gevura. This is an instantiation, this is an experience and an iteration of Gevura that's used for the purpose of proliferation, creativity. And we're going to explain this outside, but first he just brings a pasuk, which all of us are familiar with, Kamei Shekasav. The pasuk says in Ashrei, Kvoid malchuscha yameru ugvurascha yidaberu. And so here we see there's literally a pasuk where we express the connection between Gevura and Dibur. Dibur is connected to Gevura. But if you think of it, even without a pasuk, just conceptually, philosophically, theologically, we can all understand that speech is very, very, very linked up with the energy of limitation, because we always have to analyze speech in contrast to voice. Right, because verbalization, articulation has two components, and we've spoken about this, I know, in the past as well. There's the voice, there's the pure sound that's created by the vocal cords as a result of air that we've breathed in being pushed through the vocal cords to produce voice. And then the voice enters into the halal, into the space of the klei hadibur, which are all of the different 5 parts of the mouth which can produce various sounds, that ultimately the aleph bays, the 22 letters of the aleph bays, are all divided among these 5 categories of speech. There's the lip letters and the tongue letters and the palate letters and the throat letters and the breath letters. Did I say the teeth letters? I can't remember, but maybe throat and breath are the same. But ultimately, there are 5 different areas of the mouth that are called the Hei Moitzais Hapeh, the 5 categories from which all different sounds are produced. And the production of those sounds vis-a-vis the voice is an incredible tzimtzum. It's an incredible limitation. Because like I've said in the past, I know we've learned this together, when a person just makes of the sound itself, and a person says, ah, just sound, That measure of sound transmitted, it's like a little bizarre to think about, but like if you could imagine projecting your voice through the throat of like 30 different people who speak 30 different languages, that particular measure of voice can be turned into any language in the world. That measure of voice can become Italian, it can become, Chinese, it can become Russian, it can become anything in the world. Because voice itself is unlimited. Voice is reflective of chesed. It doesn't have boundaries. It can produce every word in every language. But once we speak, so then that's an incredible gevura, because all of a sudden we are limiting this previously unlimited energy, this vocal energy that's completely expansive, and we're limiting it to these words in this language. And it becomes hyper-specified and hyper-specific. Ugvurascha yidaberu. Dibur is connected to gevura. Why then is Dibur a holy gevura, a gevura de kedusha that's going to counteract the force of the Yetzer Hara that comes from absolute gevura, which is fallen gevura? And the answer is because everybody understands that we're not doing violence to the voice when we speak. On the contrary, it's the greatest aid to the voice, because if a person just went around the whole day and didn't articulate but just produced sounds, nobody could understand the word because they're not saying words. No one can understand anything, and there's no communication, and so nothing can function. So Dibur is a perfect example of Gevura de Kedusha, meaning it's an energy of limitation, but it's part and parcel of a very holy, very divine, very creative act, because it is not only not hindering or inhibiting expression, which is divinity, which is creativity, which is chesed. On the contrary, it is literally enabling that communication, that proliferation to occur. And so Dibur is gevura, because of gevuraschi daberu, but it's a gevura to kedusha. It's incredibly lofty. It's an experience, as I'm currently speaking, of utilizing gevura for the purpose of productivity, for the purpose of manifesting something creative in the world, which is Hashem, which is Hashem's energy. Nimsa, says Rebbe Nachman, so that's a deeper level. Kishiyoyimar ani mamin, when a Jew says with their mouths, ani mamin be'emunah shalema, I believe, kanal. And he says this with his mouth, ani mamin be'emunah shalema, so then hu gevuras to kedusha. That is channeling the energy of sweetened gevura by taking the voice, that's the aspect of the unlimited, and channeling it into the energy of gevura, which is linked to the Yetzer Hara, but we're counteracting the gevura that's total, which is essentially just not speaking at all. And we're activating the energy within us of sweetened gevura, which can counteract the force of the Yetzer Hara. With that, we sweeten the doubt, which is an aspect of gevura de klipa that wants to withhold from us any access to godliness. And over here, by speaking out our faith, essentially what we're doing is we recognize that we have a doubt, meaning we recognize there's gevura there. But in channeling that into a conversation, in channeling that into a prayer, in channeling that into a question as opposed to a rejection, so that changes the whole dynamic. Because if a person has a doubt and because of that they say, forget about it, what, I'm going to talk to God about not believing in God? I don't believe in God, there's no God, finished. And then they carry on with their life. That's gevura nefula. Because that's an energy of withholding, but it's total. But when a person is able to use that experience of challenge and doubt and suffering and the struggle to believe, and then channels it into Dibur, the process of speech is in and of itself manifesting or symbolic of the way in which this doubt wasn't a total cutting off from Hashem. This doubt is just another leg of the journey of my deepening of my understanding of Hashem, the deepening of our intimate bond, and I bring my issues with Hashem, gevura, to Hashem. Gevura de Kedusha. And then things flow. And the same is true for relationships. On the level of Ben Adam L'Chaveiro, especially husband and wives, where there could be challenges, difficulties, Gevura. But Gevura Nefula means, so that's it. The relationship is over. Or Chas v'Shalom, there's just a certain door that closes, and that's, there's no communication. That's Gevura Nefula, that's total blockage. So how do we sweeten that? Is not to ignore the fact that there's an issue, there's a challenge, somebody's feeling slighted, somebody's feeling hurt, somebody's not feeling heard, no. What we do is we have the difficult conversations. So the Gevura is there, but it becomes Gevura de Kedusha. And it becomes something that we're able to grow through. If not something that we can go through easily, but it's not a total blockage. So we grow through it. We don't go through it. We grow together through it. And that's Ezer Kenegdo, right? That's what it means. To have husband and wives who are helping each other through the oppositional force. That's what marriage is all about. But when we don't allow those challenges to become Gevura Nefula, and instead we can channel it into Dibor, so then it's very wonderful. And then difficult conversations are had, corrections are made amidst humility and love and vision and work, and it's the most wonderful thing. And then we go back to the beginning of the pasuk of Lo Tov Hayos Adam Levadai. Then we can really see it. It wouldn't have been better if we were alone. Because it's specifically through the Kenegdo, it's specifically through the challenges that's the Ezer, because it lifts us up to be able to access brand new levels of growth and brand new levels of development and brand new levels of depth and brand new levels of... And so many of us know this just from our own experience, that this is the way it goes. Husband and wives, parents and children, family members, it's the difficult things. I think we may have even had a shiur earlier in the series, very early on, where we spoke about the beauty of difficult conversations. I think Rebbe Nachman said there are dvarim na'im, there are really sweet things that come about through bilbul and difficulty and darkness. And that's what the Rebbe is explaining over here. Let our challenges and questions not be rejections, let them be opportunities for learning. Right? So we don't ignore the fact that we're having a challenge. I was just having a conversation recently with somebody, and pointing out to him, everything that he doesn't sit exactly right, in his mind is an immediate rejection. And I say, you're right to have a challenge with that, Maimer Chazal or with that pasuk, but let's rephrase it as a question. And it's right to be a question. If it's a question, it can have a response. We can go back and forth, we can talk, we can reinterpret, we can discover a healthier way of looking at it, we can see it in a broader context, etc. But if it's not Gevura de Kedusha in that way, right? You understand where it becomes a conversation. So there's still Gevura there, but it contributes to the development and to the flow. If it's not that, then it's Gevura Nefula. Then we're closing all the doors, and usually we're throwing out babies with bathwater, and that's it. And this is the way it is with us and Hashem. Like in every relationship, we hit a little bump. So what do? We turn around and run away, like the princess, right, in The Lost Princess in chapter 3 of the story of our lives, right, where she makes that grave error. I think that's the name of the chapter. A grave error. What's the grave error? That the king said something not so good to her, and she ran away to her room. It was Gevura Nefula. There was rigidity, and it was total, and the door shut, and she thought that she has to run away. Gevura de Kedusha means that hurt. I have to reflect on what that was, but I'm not going anywhere because I believe that this relationship runs deeper than this particular hiccup. That's Gevura de Kedusha. And then we channel it into a conversation, and usually it supercharges the relationship. It's like if a person is trying to water their garden, right, and they put their thumb over the opening and the water comes out that much stronger. That's Gevura de Kedusha, right? It's these experiences that can supercharge a marriage, that can supercharge the depth of a relationship between a father and a son when there's some conflict, but they're able to have a conversation and resolve it. And And they're both able to show up, which is the key, vulnerably and humbly. And they can connect on a human level. So the Gevura is Gevura, but it's Gevura de Kedusha. And that's what the Gemara says in Brachas Tavheim and Aleph La'olam Yargiz Adam Yetzer Tov Al Yetzer Hara. We don't respond to the Yetzer Hara, which is Gevura, by going all the way to the side of Chesed. There is an aspect of that as well, because obviously Chesed is also going to be advantageous, which is the opposite. Parenthetically, I mentioned this recently in a shiur. It's the opposite of what most people think, that the Yetzer Hara comes from too much Chesed. People think that the Yetzer Hara is like, there's no boundaries. It's porei together. It's pritzos, right? We don't have the ability to self-control, and therefore people think that what's necessary is more rigidity, is more control. And in a certain sense, it's the opposite. In a certain sense, because the Yetzer Hara is rooted in Gevura, as we've explained, and the Mekubalim and the Tzaddikim reveal to us, sometimes what's actually needed in our lives is more flow. It seems counterintuitive. It doesn't mean that we should try to control ourselves less, but it means that the general energy of our lives is too controlling, is too expectational, expectant, and then when things don't go our way, so then we escape. And we escape into the Yetzer Hara's, whatever it is that he offers us to escape into whatever it is, into food, into immorality, into whatever it is. So sometimes, on the contrary, what we actually need is more chesed, not more gvura. What we actually need to bring into our lives is letting go of control a little bit, not being so rigid. And then we won't feel the need to have to run into the greatest of all expenses, which is just the trick of the Yetzer Hara, to force us into a place which is totally no oxygen, gevura. There's no God in that place. It's godless, right? So sometimes we need to bring more chesed and let go. And then you'll see how that manifests in the Yetzer Hara, also just backing up a bit. So that's true. That's one of the ways that we counteract the gevura of the Yetzer Hara, is with chesed, nachon. But over here, Rebbe Nachman is teaching us that another way to battle the Yetzer Hara of gevura nefula is by gevura de kedusha, is by sweetened gevura. And that's what the Gemara is telling us. How should a person react when they experience the Yetzer Hara? What should the Yetzer Tov do in response to the Yetzer Hara? Says the Gemara, La'olam yargiz adam Yetzer Tov al Yetzer Hara. The way to fight fire in this case, well, it's literal, right, because gevura is fire, is with fire. If the root of the Yetzer Hara is roges, which is gevura, so then la'olam yargiz adam Yetzer Tov al Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Tov's got to also be gevura. Ta'ainu sha gevuras de kedushas mamte gevuras de klipa. That means that the holy gevura of yargiz adam Yetzer Tov, which is channeling that gevura into productive conversations between us and Hashem, between us and others. That's what the Mishnah that's what the Gemara is telling us. The way to respond to the Yetzer Hara's gevura is with gevura from the side of the Yetzer Tov, which is sweetened gevura, which is elevated gevura, which is productive gevura, which is speech that is a tzimtzum, it's a constriction vis-a-vis the voice, but it allows for communication. It's the thumb going over the opening of the hose, which makes the flow and the stream that much stronger. That's the roiges. It is through sweetened gevura, in the way that we mentioned, through conversation, through speech, that we're able to sweeten the gevura de klipa. And the Gemara says, if a person wants to heal their rigidity, is that interesting? The word ragzan is like rigidity, reish gimel, rag, right? RG. So maybe it's connected, right? Ragzan is rigid, right? That a person is so mad at everybody all the time and kapdan, and things have to be just so. And so how should a person heal that? Says the Gemara, yedibure benachas. A person should try to speak gently. It's so deep. Because what's the connection? Okay, I understand on a practical level, being an angry person usually comes with a lot of yelling and speaking harshly and sharply. So if a person wants to work on that, so try to speak gently. True. The Torah is true on many levels. That's true on the simple level. But in the deeper level, it's much deeper. On the deeper level, Kabbalistically, spiritually, metaphysically speaking, what was the problem with roy gaze, with anger, is gevura nefula. Right? It's gevura that's rigid, that's not letting anything through. How am I going to counteract that? With gevura de kedusha. Ugvurascha yedaberu, says the Rebbe good. Dibur. Yedibure benachas. That's a way to channel hard feelings, harsh feelings, into a productive way of expressing. Like I tell my Shmuel all the time, and my kids, and my Aura, it's okay to feel feelings. Every feeling is okay to feel. We can't say anything about feelings. What we can say is that there's appropriate ways of expressing feelings and not appropriate ways of expressing feelings. Feelings, he's allowed to feel angry, she's allowed to feel jealous. Feelings are okay. The question is, and that's part of chinuch, is teaching children what's the appropriate ways to express their feelings. Like we always say, use your words, right? So the words is okay, but dibur benachas, there's a right way to express that feeling, and that can counteract that storm of emotion, because emotion is always good. Emotion is very holy, right? The midos come from Hashem. Even anger is a holy emotion. It's an opportunity. The question is, how are we channeling it? So we don't either want to look at the Yetzer Hara and respond to his rigidity with utter, absolute rigidity, because that's not counteracting it. That's the same energy. What we need to do is to integrate the energies of the Yetzer Hara and elevate them. So says the Gemara, if a person's dealing with anger, if a person's dealing with gevura de sitra achra, you would think the answer is don't speak at all, right? Remove yourself from any experience. Don't feel those feelings, and that's not what it says. You're allowed to speak. There's allowed to be gevura if a person's feeling a difficult emotion. That's okay. Benachas. The gevura is okay to feel. It should be expressed benachas. It should be expressed gently. Nimsa shadibur benachas u'ena kol kach roiges. Right? So there's gevura, but it's not so. Vashtika meshatik roiges. Right? So shtika, silence, would be the opposite. But the Gemara doesn't tell you that you should be silent. The Gemara says speak. There should be dibur, because ugvuraschi daberu. We need that there should be gevura. That's okay. If a person speaks fully, strongly, so that's not gently. The way to counteract it is not by being silent. The way to counteract it is by speaking, but by making sure that we're speaking calmly, sensitively, gently. Okay, that's a very, very beautiful teaching. Let's carry on to Sichos Haran Kuf Mem Gimel. And the Rebbe says like this: This is also from the writings of those chaverim, those friends, right, the students of Rebbe Nachman who were there before Rebbe Nachman got there, and they are a reiteration of what's written in Likutei Moharan Kama in the first volume, Torah Reish Samach Gimel, the 263rd lesson, and it goes like this. Says the Rebbe Sichos Haran, Ki yesh shnei minei achilas habahamios. There are two kinds of what it means to eat in an animalistic way. Dahainu, usually we say this person's eating like an animal, right? We should never say about somebody else, but sometimes, it feels to us looking at the way somebody's eating that like a beast, like an animal, right? So what do we mean usually? That's the first kind of eating like an animal, which is on the surface. Right? A person's just stuffing food in their face and eating with their hands or whatever it is. Right? The food is human food. It's fit for consumption, but the way that it's being eaten is animalistic. That's one thing. And here's a deeper thing. But there's another kind of person that, on the contrary, he's not eating like an animal. He's eating like a person. But for whatever reason, the food is not human food. Dahainu, meaning to say, even though it can look like human food, the the sparks of holiness that are meant to be elevated by making a bracha rishona, making a bracha achrona, a person who is eating with holy thoughts and intentions to use this energy to support their davening, their learning, their kindness, etc. For whatever reason, I don't really understand why, but the Rebbe says for whatever reason, those sparks are not yet ready. They're not yet clarified enough to be integrated into the person and to become part of their energy so that they should serve Hashem. Eluhu machal behema. The sparks are not. It's like trying to bake a cake or to bake challah with like kernels of wheat. Like they're not in the right. It's wheat, but it's not. You can't mix it with water and put it in the oven. It's not a challah, right? We need to crush the wheat. We need to separate the wheat from the chaff. We need to crush the wheat and winnow and etc. All the melechas hapas, and then we need to get to flour, and then flour with water, and then it needs to rise. And so it's like the same kind of idea. Like you have material that's just not fit. It's just not ra'i for Adam. It's machal behema. Says the Rebbe, when a person eats either like an animal, so that the food is human food, but the way that we're eating is not proper, or for whatever reason, maybe it's not our fault, it's just a fact that the food is not yet ready to be integrated into our human energy. Says the Rebbe, this can cause fever. This can cause for a person to have fever. And this is hinted to the pasuk in Tehillim. Here, kavta enosh l'reishenu. You have caused a human being to rule over us, to ride above us. Dahainu, says the Rebbe, that's a reference kishana b'madrega katana. When a person's on a lowly level, why is that hinted to? When here kavta enosh l'reishenu is speaking about when we're on a lowly level, and the answer is yes, right? Because essentially what we're saying is sha'adam gadol mimenu. Here, kafta enosh l'reishenu. When you put humanity above us, what does that mean? It means that we're not on the level of humanity, we're below. Sha'adam, that the concept of a human is gadol mimenu, is on a higher level than where I'm at, which means either we're eating like an animal, or the food that we're eating is not ready for human consumption. So what's the rest of the pasuk? Banu be'esh v'mayim. We've entered into fire and water, says the Rebbe. What's fire and water? Hanu kar v'cham, or chom. This is cold and hot, right? Mayim is naturally cool, and fire, of course, is hot. And hanu kadachas. This is fever. That a person feels chills, or a person feels very hot, very warm, and a person goes back and forth. This fire and water is a result of her kavta enosh l'reishenu, of a person being on a lower spiritual level, where Enosh, the concept of a person eating like a human or eating human food, is liroshenu, is above us. We're below. And the Rebbe says, even the doctors say this. If a person eats too much, they're going to feel some sensation of fever. Either they're going to feel too cold or they're going to feel too hot. And that's true. He says, this is true physically. But it can also cause spiritual fever. There's a misprint over here. 1 second, let me just look this up and see what it actually is. I have the sefer. Kufman Gimel. Second. When a person is in a state of b'chinas das. Right, so take away that letter pei. When a person is on the level of das, ayesh by ava v'yira de kedusha, then a person's whole system is working properly. They love the things they're supposed to love. They are fearful or anxious about the things that they ought to feel fearful or anxious about. Ava and yira, they work properly. That's what das means, because das is the third in the triad of Chachma, Bina, Das. And we know that Chachma is on the right side, the right hemisphere of the brain, big picture thinking. Bina is on the left side of the brain, that's Gvura, right? So it's detailed thinking. Das is a conjugation of Chachma and Bina, which means that it has within it Chesed and Gvura. And so when a person is in a state of das, where they're not animalistic, when they're not eating like an animal, and the food that they're eating is not animal food, so then their ava and yira are perfectly balanced and they function properly. But when a person sinks down into a lower level, azai, so then again we said like it will cause physically fever, because it comes from the pasuk of Hirkavta enish l'reshenu banu be'eshu v'mayim, which we said the fire and water is fever, and a person can be physically ill from overeating or eating food that isn't fit spiritually, as even the doctors say, right? But here is deeper because we're speaking about a spiritual fever. What does it mean, a spiritual fever? Well, a fever means that a person's feeling too hot or too cold. So then what's hot and cold? It's chesed and gevura. Chesed is water, that's cold, and fire is gevura, right? Is heat. So if a fever is that these things are out of whack and a person's body temperature is not balanced, so then a spiritual fever means that a person's feeling way too much gevura or way too much chesed. And the Rebbe says this is really what's happening when a person is eating like an animal, is that there's no sense of balance. And things are erratic, out of the ordinary in terms of the normal balanced functionality. Because it says that the advantage of a human being over an animal in a certain sense is ayin, doesn't exist. Says the Rebbe, this that a human being has an advantage over an animal is ayin, right? What is ayin? Is das. Because the pasuk says, and das and chachma are correlated, even though again das has bina as well, it's true. But over here, they're seen as interconnected and interchangeable. This is the advantage of what it means to eat like a person, is we have das. If we have das, we don't have fever. We're not feverish. Everything is in its right place. Nimtza, it emerges when a person eats proper food. Then he's an Adam. But when a person is eating either like an animal or food that is not fit for consumption, ke'elu, hu bebechinas behema v'noifel bebechinas das, v'noifel ba'ava v'yira nefula, and a person suffers from spiritual fever. And it all has to do with our eating. So I think the level of eating like an animal, that's the second level. So how's a person supposed to know which food is spiritually fit for a person or not? I don't know. How could a person know that? But to eat properly, that we should be making sure that at least our eating is like an Adam, Rebbe Nachman says, can help ward off this exaggerated swinging from a higher level to a lower level, gvura, ava, and things are out of whack with all of the associated aspects of that. In order to have integration, we need to eat in an integrated way. Zeshakasav again, and that's what Rabbi Nachman said, if you want to know where spiritual fever comes from, too hot, too cold, too much chesed, too much gevura, not in balance, it's because we were no longer human. We fell down, and the humans were l'reshenu. There were humans above us, but we were like animals. So then, then we fell into the fever of fire and water. We fell into fallen love and fallen yira that are not being expressed in a holy way. And it all has to do with eating. Okay, that's Kuf Mem Gimel. Let's take a look at Kuf Mem Daled. And here Rebbe Nachman writes more biographically, historically, Kishabami Lemberg, Rabbi Nachman had taken a journey to the city of Lemberg where he was trying to seek healing. And he had his sickness, dainu ahust, shiur, shachefes, just tuberculosis, the lung illness that eventually killed him. Miskaber love, and it was very, very bad. And because he had this very difficult lung condition, so we know that pure air is very, very important, obviously, right, for lungs. And so the doctors would prescribe that people should spend a lot of time in nature, because nature is a place, the trees are oxygenizing, right? The air has its oxygen from the trees that are releasing oxygen. The air is very pure, very clean. So therefore, so he would do this. He would travel every day in the outskirts of the city in nature, both for refuah, both for the healing of it, and many other of his wondrous intentions that we have no idea what they were. He used to take journeys to different villages and come back and say wild things like, on one of his journeys, he said, every step that I took, I was fixing up the sin of Yeravam ben Nevat. Right? It's like we can't imagine these things. We have no idea, the mysteries upon mysteries. I like to say, we know more about Rebbe Nachman than any other Hasidic master of that generation, and we know less about Rebbe Nachman than anybody else, because he was such a mystery. He was such an enigma. Amish an enigma. But this is what he would do. It's funny, we called this whole series Class Trip with Rabbi Nachman, and over here they actually took a class trip with, like he says, we heard so much Torah, the Kama Sichos Sipurim Neflam and Araim, and many wondrous stories on the trip, on the class trip. When he would go out into nature, and he would take his Hasidim with him, and they would go and spend the days in the fields. The Rebbe Nachman has a very famous teaching that it's very good to daven to Hashem in a field where there's a lot of grass, and to sing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu there. And Rebbe Nachman said that's pshat, that the pasuk says Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basada. Yitzchak went out to daven to Hashem basada, in the field. Why in the field? Because the Rebbe said that when a person davens in nature, in a certain sense, nature is incredibly spiritual, incredibly emotional. That's why we give flowers, right? When we want to express our love. There's something spiritual about flowers. There's something, they almost have a hyper particular expression of life force that maybe even animals don't have. There's just something about nature, about fruits, the fullness of the color and the texture and the taste and the smell. It's alive, right? Nature is alive. And the Rebbe says there are spirits in nature. There are souls that are nisgalgal, that come down in gilgulim into nature. And when a person davens to Hashem and is inspired by the nature with which he or she is surrounded, it's as if all of the souls that are in all of the grasses and all the trees and all the branches and all the leaves and all the fruits and all the flowers and all the everything enters into their tefillah and is able to have an aliyah, is able to go up to Shemayim, riding along the vehicle of our prayer. And so Rebbe Nachman says, if you pray in a field, you don't pray alone. There's a minyan. You're surrounded. You're surrounded by souls, and they all enter into the prayer and they go up to Shemayim. Says Rebbe Nachman, guess where he taught that teaching to us? It was a live demonstration. He told this to us also on one of these journeys when we traveled with him, and we stood in a field. Can you imagine, like, this field that he's describing, this Sada Echad, is still around in all likelihood. Like, there's an actual place in Ukraine where this happened not so long ago. Right, like there's a particular field. Rabbi Nachman, I'm sure, knew which one it was. He stopped the wagon there. He was still sitting on the wagon, and we all stood around him in the field. And then it was sunset. We wanted to daven there. Then Rebbe Nachman taught us the amazing advantage of praying in a field. Like he said over there, like I just spoke out, when a person davens in a field, as I call all the grasses enter into the prayer. We're inspired by the nature around us. It becomes part and parcel of our tefillah, and we elevate it all, and it goes up to Shemayim. And then he said, the same way that we're standing around him and he sees us, he sees the souls in every plant. How each plant is pining, yearning, bring me closer to Hashem. Please incorporate me into your tefillah. La'alois v'lichnas b'soich tfilasai, zeh ashar l'Hashem, b'zois yavei aron el HaKodesh. They all wanted to elevate themselves into the prayer, that should be the gateway for those souls to go back to Shemayim. And Rebbe Nachman saw that. When we speak about finding the godliness in nature, Rebbe Nachman saw this. He walked past trees. He knew who they were. They were souls, and he felt them yearning, please incorporate me into your service of God. Please enable me to become a vessel for your closeness with Hashem. Also the Torah, which is Torah Yud Beis in Tinyana in the second volume, very famous teaching, amazing teaching. Al Pasuk va'ayeh hasel oil b'simin Yud Beis, that was also said there. Al Maimer Mai Time Agam Lo Zutar Gnufte v'Torah Arucha Gnufte. The Maimer in the Gemara in Shabbos, why does a camel have a small tail and an ox has a long tail? Hamaschel Eila Spar Bigedoilos, which is Simin Tesvav, the 15th teaching in the second volume. Right, so that's Torah Tazayin Kol Zeh Shemanu Ala Derech. These were all class trip teachings. They were all taught on the journey, on the way. B'shas hatiyul v'oid shari Torahs. So that's how Rebbe Nachman was revealing these teachings in nature, and maybe that's why they're best absorbed even today in nature, in natural settings, around the campfire, walking through the woods, sitting in beautiful nature. Why has our tradition become divorced from nature? Why do we sit cloistered up in square rooms with square tables and square stenders and square books? We need to bring back the circular energy of nature. That's really where teaching should be happening, out in Hashem's natural world. Like Rebbe Nachman taught his students, out in nature. All of these teachings, all of these Torahs are linked to this particular Haggadah that's brought in that Gemara between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Zera at a time where they were jesting. And he says, see over there and you'll understand how all of these different teachings are correlated to that Maimer Chazal. Okay, with the last few minutes, let's take a look at Kuf Mem Hey. And Rebbe Nachman says the following: Kishadiber imi v'gilu li aderech lasis me'atoiris tfilas. One of the most fundamental, if not in a certain sense, the most fundamental, if you really understand it, chidushim, novelties of Breslover Chasidus, of what Rebbe Nachman revealed in the world, is the importance of turning Torah into Tefillah. Now, on a literal level, what this means is a person learns something, and then immediately they daven to Hashem, help me fulfill this. That it shouldn't just remain intellectual. Help me. I want to be Mekayim this. If I learned, teachings about Gevura and about difficult conversations that can aid relationships and supercharge with everything that we learned in the first piece. So we finished learning it, now daven it. And that's what Rebbe Nachman taught Rebbe Nassan how to do, to turn Torah into Tefillah. But on a broader, more metaphorical level, this is exactly what Breslov wanted to do. It wanted to take all of the information of Judaism and all the culture of Judaism and all of the behavioral engagement of Judaism, and it wanted to turn it into prayer, meaning it wanted for all of those experiences to become vessels for the most visceral, relationship-oriented dveikus with Hashem, to turn all the Torah into tefillah. And that's really what Breslov is all about, okay? And that's on a deeper level. But when Rebbe Nachman was teaching Rebbe Nassan how to do this, Amar li shatay lichtev la'atzmei atfilas, he said, write them down, which of course Rebbe Nassan eventually did. And we have Sefer Likutei Tfilas, which is the most remarkable Sefer, where Rebbe Nassan goes through every single teaching in Rabbi Nachman's Sefer Likutei Maran, and he turns it into a tefillah. So you can learn the teaching in Likutei Maran, you close it, you know it well, it's amazing Torah, with all these different concepts and ideas and madrigas and levels and advice and everything, and then you open Likutei Tfilas, and it's the same thing, but it's in tefillah form. Now you can daven all of it in the most wondrous way. So Rebbe Nassan says, write it down. Says Rebbe Nassan, I understood from Rebbe Nachman and his hand motions and his facial expressions and his whole energy, that this was a wondrous, lofty thing. Lasis me'at Torah's tefillas, to turn Torah into tefillah. And he says, this makes great delight before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the likes of which never existed in all of creation. This was something new that Rebbe Nachman originated, to turn Torah into tefillah. Rebbe Nachman was speaking to somebody else, and he was yearning, and he said, I really want you to turn the Torah into tefillah. And he said, can you please do that? Can you please turn my Torah into prayers? Who should I give it over to? Who will understand how to do this? One time, Rebbe Nachman had a sefer. It's called Yara Katana. It's a collection of different prayers that were written by Kadmonim. And over there at the end, there were certain inyanim, meaning certain Torah thoughts or certain pieces of advice of how to get close to Hashem, that were written in the terminology of prayer. And each paragraph begins with the word Elikai, asking Hashem, help me fulfill this. Rebbe Nachman called me over, said Rav Nosson, and he pointed to me in the text, and he said, hey, have a look, check this out. V'ramazli az kemedaber yirah shezeh mechaber medaber kamen yana b'drush l'Hashem is b'lashon tefillah. Rebbe Nachman said, isn't this interesting? Look at this interesting sefer. You see the mechaber addresses many drushim, many Torah thoughts, and he puts it into the language of prayer. V'ramazli shechukasim oid lasis kain me'atorah savakdoshas. And the Rebbe was hinting that this is what he wanted done with his own Torah. Laslis mikala Torah's tefillas, to turn all of the Torahs into tefillas. Ki cheina yadarko, says Rebbe Nosson, because this was Rebbe Nachman's way. L'ramiz al devarim gevayim ayde devarim ketanim. He wanted to channel down huge tikkunim, which how many tens of thousands of Jews have benefited from Likutei Tefillas. Rebbe Nosson might not have known that. He was writing these as little manuscripts for his small Hasidim, a few hundred people, thousands, tens of thousands, and nothing's even begun yet. It's going to be millions and maybe billions of people one day who are going to benefit from this book. And the Rebbe wanted to bring that into the world. The Rebbe wanted that Rebbe Nosson, who's the aspect of Tefillah, without getting into this now, vis-a-vis Rebbe Nachman, who's the sun, who's Torah, and Rebbe Nosson is the moon. And so it had to be Rebbe Nosson. Rebbe Nachman couldn't turn his Torah into Tefillah. Rebbe Nachman was the Torah. Rebbe Nosson is the Tefillah. So it had to be Rebbe Nosson. And the Rebbe wanted to bring that into the world, but he doesn't force it. Everything with a nachas. He would be miramis to the greatest things. He had many reasons why he couldn't say the thing. How easy would it be? Saying, how difficult is it for Rebbe Nachman to call Rebbe Nosson over and say, hey, listen, this is what I want you to do, but that wasn't his way. Hints. Only hints. That's the way it had to be, because it had to get under the radar so that the Yetzer Hara shouldn't stop it. Everything by Rabbi Nachman was hints. He would never say anything explicit. He wanted the person to come to it themselves. That's, by the way, why Rabbi Nachman was such a great artist. He's a brilliant artist in everything that he does. His stories are art. His musical compositions are art. His Torah is art. His whole way is art. Why? Because what is art? A great piece of art doesn't reveal the totality of what it is. It's like a magician never tells his secrets. A great work of art only hints. It evokes from within us interpretation. Any great piece of art can be interpreted in many ways. Otherwise, it's not art. It's too explicit. The great poets knew how to leave things just vague enough that it evokes a sense of mystery, and it makes you think and it makes you feel. Rabbi Nachman was a true artist. He didn't say the thing. He dances around it. His stories are open to interpretation. His Torah is open to interpretation. His visions are open to interpretation. He doesn't say the thing itself, but he manages to draw a circle, not by taking a pen and drawing the circle, but by coloring in every other part of the page. And so Mamela, you have left a circle, but it's, you understand, it's art. The Rebbe was an artist. He was a poet. He was a poetic soul. He was an artistic soul. So Rebbe Nachman says everything the Rebbe did is remazing. That the person should come to it on their own. Me'elav im yirtzeh, only if he wants. He didn't push anybody, pressure anybody. That wasn't the Rebbe's way. Rebbe Nachman says, and this was just one of the wondrous ways that he engaged with me and that he guided me, and he says it's impossible for me to say. Just very, very deep. Very deep. Gam Amar, and then Rabbi Nachman also told Rebbe Nachman, when we accomplish this and turn the Torah into Tefillah, especially Torahs on the level of Likutei Moharan, if the Chaver are privileged enough, to be journeying along with us, exalted teachings that nobody ever heard of. It's a totally different level of Torah. It is incomparable, absolutely inimitable. Next level Torah, to turn that into Tefillah. Nase mizeh, says Rabbi Nachman, to Rabbi Nachman, nase mizeh shashulim gedalim lamala. This makes incredible delight by Hashem. Shalei alu lefanav yizbarach shashulim gedalim ke'elim yemais olam. That from the beginning of time, from the beginning of history, never has Hashem had so much pride and pleasure as when we take Torah now and turn it into Tefillah, especially Rebbe Nachman's Torah and Rebbe Nassan's Tefillahs. Special kind of enjoyment that Hashem has. That will be brought elsewhere, where Rebbe Nachman also was encouraging Rebbe Nachman very strongly and teaching him what a great thing it is to do. And if the Chaver who are listening don't have a copy of Likutei Tefillas, I highly, highly, highly suggest that if your Hebrew is good enough, you get your hands on a Hebrew copy and say just a little bit every day. And the whole thing has been translated as, I believe it's called the 50th Gate by the Breslov Research Institute. If I'm not mistaken, I think, I don't want to say for sure, but you can easily check it up afterwards. I think it is on Sefaria. I think the tefillos are there too. I think that's all available online for free, if I'm not mistaken. And so it's really accessible, and they're the most wondrous, lofty. I mean, it pierces right through. It opens up our heart, and all of us are looking for ways to feel and ways to connect and This is an incredible technology to enable us to connect in a higher way, higher frequencies. And so, highly encouraged that we should onboard it and make use of these gifts that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gifted us through Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Nassan, his faithful messengers. Okay, Siyata D'Shmaya. So those are 3 teachings, very briefly, just to review. The first teaching is about sweetening the Yetzer Hara with positive gevura, which we said is dibur, right? That's still gevura, but it allows the words through. We learned about eating like a human being and the danger, right? Chas v'shalom, of falling into spiritual fever or even physical ailment if a person's not eating in a balanced way. We learned 4 teachings, right? 144 was all about prayer and revealing Torah on a journey, praying in a field, bringing all of nature into our service of Hashem, and finally, the importance of turning Torah into Tefillah. Hashem should help us turn all of this into Tefillah. It shouldn't just be learning it, but it should be Lilmad Amanas Lasis Le'alimad Wa'ikr Ela HaMaisa. The main thing is Le'uvdul HaMaisa, to bring it down into our actual service of Hashem. We should become more elevated, more conscious, more compassionate, deeper, more deeply rooted in truth, and find a way to spread this and spread all these teachings that are so absolutely desperately needed in our generation. Siyata D'Shmaya. Okay, Chaver, thank you so much for joining. Usually we do questions. Right now I do have to jump off, and I'm so sorry about it. If you have my contact, feel free to send me a message, an email if you have any questions. I'm wishing everybody the most remarkable, wonderful rest of your day, rest of your week. Sam, thanks for joining us. Reb Shimon, Paul, thank you so much. Miriam, thank you to everybody for joining us. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week.
ואתה האב שלי שכל כך אוהב אותי, האב שלי מלך חי וקיים על כל נשימה שאני